please welcome our next panel, the Open versus Closed debate.
You want us in specific chairs?
Oh, wow, yeah, they are bright.
Yeah? Brett's not here, otherwise it would go like there are 4 lights. But anyway. All right, thank you everybody for coming. If you're here yesterday, you've probably seen enough of me. But just in case you weren't here yesterday, my name is Hai. I'm the Integrity Ambassador with the Esports Integrity Commission. We're a regulatory body of sorts that ensures fair, safe play in esports competitions around the world. And like to learn more about us, we're at the networking. We have a table there. Feel free to pop by, ask about what we do, membership if you're interested, and our educational programs, because we don't just ban people. So today, we've got 2 great guys here to talk about it. David, to begin with, is David Souza. He actually replaces Alex. I don't know if they updated that. Oh, yeah, they did.
Yeah, my
Cool.
face is up
All
there,
right,
so there
perfect.
was enough lead time.
All right, so that's good. There was enough lead time for that. And he's from ESL Pro League. And then we have Evan Frasca from T1, the team that's on Forbes' top 10 most valuable esports teams in the world.
Killing it right now, yeah.
Yeah.
Doing pretty good.
So let's start with Evan. Tell us something about yourself.
Sure, yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Evan Frasca. I'm the Director of Talent Management at T1 Entertainment and Sports. I work primarily with the Western half of the brand, primarily the Valorant team as well as all of our Valorant creators. But I do work in the context of the publisher, all of the esports leagues, open or closed. I work closely with the LCK. I actually got my start in esports working for the Philadelphia Fusion, so I've gotten to work with Activision Blizzard on the Overwatch League model as well. So when this topic kind of came up, I figured I was a good fit to lend some experience.
Cool, thanks, Evan.
Yep.
David, over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm David Souza, Director of Communications for the ESL Pro League. If you didn't know, the ESL Pro League is kind of like a hybrid model between open and closed, so it's a very apt topic for us to be talking on. I'm positioned in the small neutral body known as the Commissioner's Office, which runs all of the B2B side of the ESL Pro League between ESL Gaming and our partner teams. So the business, the governance, the league structure, the revenue sharing, all of that kind of behind the curtains good stuff.
Great, thanks, David. Well, now it's time to, I think, kind of define this title of our panel today a little more open, closed. It's like up to interpretation. But the interesting thing about esports, for those of you who are not familiar with how esports is run in the tournament basis, is we have everything from seriously firewalled leagues all the way to free-for-all tournaments that could be happening in your neighborhood today. And everything in between, every single combination that works. So while the title actually says, which is best, I think today we're not going to just talk about which is best, because I don't believe there's a one-size-fits-all. I think none of us on the stage believe that. There is a lot of variance in esports. I think the thing I hate about the term is that it seems to make it feel like it's just one thing, and esports is not one thing. We don't talk about traditional sports as, oh, sports, everybody does sports. It doesn't make sense. Every game is different. Every game has a different community. And because of that, the model affects it too. Certain games fit certain communities better, and certain kinds of models would probably fit certain venues and certain business objectives better as well. So hopefully today we'll cover a little bit about that. And feel free to ask questions throughout. Just catch my attention. You want to throw food at me, that's fine too. That's always welcome. And we can jump into questions so that you don't forget it at the end of the session. Now, what I want to start with is, rather than open or close, let's hit right in the middle. And I think that's where David comes in great for Pro League, because as he said in the beginning, it's a hybrid model. So tell us a little bit about what that really means in terms of hybrid, and why it's something that fits and works well for you guys.
Sure. So the EPL's interpretation of kind of a hybrid structure came about through an agreement known as the Louvre Agreement. The Louvre Agreement has tried to ensure that the structure gets the best of both worlds and then limits and mitigates all the negatives of whether it was particularly open or particularly closed. So if we focus in on purely the group stages, we're on 14 partner teams and 10 open. So it's it's pretty balanced. We're slightly over on maybe kind of about 60%ish, but it's got that right equilibrium to ensure that we can capitalize on the pros of open, which means you get a good flow of talent, you get excitement, you get a diversification of content, you get positive reinforcement from the community and the fans because you're not limiting that kind of zero to hero journey or the Cinderella stories that we've seen in some of our recent seasons where non-member teams have really kind of taken that and flown with it. But then we're also getting the stability and the financial reassurance and the predictability that comes from a closed model with our partner teams, because that is a huge fact of life. Esports tournaments and esports teams are businesses, and the ability to predict and forecast your engagement and your viewership and your exposure is a huge part of selling that business. And without that, you don't make money, you don't make sponsors, and that's a huge fact of life. So we've got this kind of middle model where we can capitalize on both. We can have the reassurances of the exposure and the sustainability on the financial side to make sure that it's still a viable product and title for teams to play in, but then we've also still got those wild cards and those kind of amazing hype moments that come from new blood and new talent season on season. So that's kind of the justification behind the EPL's adoption of a hybrid model, and I think it limits the negatives or the cons of each one, which, as we said, were the volatility, the lack of financial stability, and sometimes the lack of wildcard excitement moments.
That's interesting. So yeah, so hybrid model is great, and so now we're going to jump into sort of like talk a little bit more and spread out from the middle on both sides. And I think what's interesting with Evan, not only is it with T1, which is in a lot of different models, competing different games, different leagues. He's also worked before with Fusion, as he said before, and as I alluded in the beginning, there is one league in esports now that is totally walled off. Maybe they really want to join this conference. Put them on the speaker. So so I'm talking about is the Overwatch League, for those of you who are not familiar. The Overwatch League in esports right now is sort of unique. If you thought Apple's walled garden was walled, this thing is like Fort Knox. So in order to join the Overwatch League, first you have to buy a seat. You buy the seat in, you can't use T1. You have to create a whole new brand, and your website has to sit on Overwatch League's portal. You can't have your own thing, and that's how it works. So there are actually teams like T1 that actually own Overwatch League seats, but you would never know unless you're really a fan and you dug hard enough. So that's really walled, and then we have everything else. So now I'm passing it on to Evan to kind of give a team's perspective on this.
Yeah,
what does it mean?
I think David hit a lot of the points right on the head in terms of the evaluative process that an organization conducts when we're looking into different games or fielding a team. Honestly, for me, I work primarily with content creators, so I actually have a lot of research to do on that aspect of life as well. I think with T1, I started in the Fusion, like I said. I've seen how closed off the Activision Blizzard model is. I went to George Washington University right down the street. I was a Smash TO there for our competitive gaming club. That's like my definition of the open model, when some 16-year-old kid can come, grab a controller, sit down, and play. So for me, like obviously, as we've alluded to, businesses can't build around that properly, right? There's a lot of evaluation that we have to do when it comes to revenue, how are we conducting sales, how are we acquiring our audiences, how are we generating a fan base that is actually has longevity as opposed to something that is fleeting and ever moving. For us, I've worked with the LCK, which is a closed model, but I would like to think that when it comes to the publishers, that's what really sets these models apart. I have had by far the most pleasant experience working across all publishers with Riot, just because of how much they put into understanding what we are looking for as an esports business, not an esports team. The LCK has a very, very wide range of broadcasting rules. We've seen, a mix of requirements come in involving co-streaming, those requirements being pulled back on, anything to do with media rights, who's allowed to cast, who's allowed to broadcast. These are all things that are really important for us. Something that I've been trying to work on with our Valorant team is really establishing our presence in North America. It's been in the press lately that we really want to have a Korean seat, and I think that for us, we have one focus and one focus only, and that's to be a really, really strong team in that closed model moving forward in North America. So for us, working with Riot across any publisher, honestly, that relationship is something that's really important. When it comes to hybrid models, like what David is talking about, I think there is a massive, massive value, especially in the FPS space. I actually am a fan of more open models in that space for the reason that the skill sets are more easily transferable. You're able to swap from title to title without having such a massive barrier to entry. And I think what ESL is doing in terms of building out their hybrid model off the basis of the Louvre agreement is very enthralling.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing that you brought up as well is, in terms of FPS, that there's genre that suits certain models. And you mentioned Smash earlier. And I think, the FGC community, the fighting games community, is probably one that's very well suited for open. Because it's single player, so it's easy to do, rather than, it's hard to find 5 guys to, or 5 people to come play. What are the considerations as a team? What do you look at when you're presented with a model, with a new league that's starting up? What are some of the key factors that, as a team, and to boot as one of the top 10 most valuable teams in the world right now, what's in your consideration? And that's the first part of the question. And second would be, if you weren't one of the top most kind of valuable teams in the world and you're starting up, does that change? What parameters changes would you do in that aspect?
Yeah. I'll answer the second one first, I think.
Perfect.
Because absolutely it changes. We are fortunate to be the historic brand when it comes to competitive League of Legends. So for us, we don't have really, we do in North America and in the Western regions, we don't have a primary goal of creating brand share, right? We know we're a titan in Korea. We know that, we have players like Faker. We've had content creators like Tyler One on the roster. Generating that type of value isn't necessarily our primary concern. What we want to do is move forward and find new innovative spaces for us to harness, whether that's to create revenue in the form of doing something on the blockchain, whether that's to create a new really amazing community space on Discord for all of our fans. Whatever it is, we want to make sure that we're giving back to our fan bases, our community, and that's honestly one of the first things that we talk about with publishers. With Riot, they understand how important their audience is. And they study their audience like crazy. When I worked in the Overwatch League, it became apparent that they were using a much more blanketable strategy, right? Which I don't think is necessarily an issue in itself, but it did make a lot of the teams feel as if they actually had to work together with other teams to get people to care about Overwatch in general. And that's something that, as a team, you don't want to see from a publisher. You want to see that publisher already be investing every single possible dollar into making their game, their esports scene, their content, every augmented piece of something that touches their game the best it can possibly be. And that's what we've seen with Riot. Arcane, things like these massive events and conventions, MSI. I've been staying up until 5 a.m. every morning, not because I have to, I swear. But that's stuff that we're really passionate about, and having conversations about ways that we can innovatively create new strategies, generate new revenues. That's all important to us.
Great. Now, I'm going to jump to you, David. You mentioned something when you were describing the hybrid model, which kind of I would call the path to pro, right? I mean, when you look at traditional sports, especially franchise sports in America, with NFL, which yesterday we had the PA here with us, NBA and all that. The permanence of that structure. The one thing that it also feeds is a very clear path to pro. So if you're right now starting out doing esports, you're doing good on the open server scene, you want to go pro, there is a path you can take. Esports, not so clear. Now, you had mentioned that. What do you think, how do you think the model, an open or closed model, what suits better for a path to pro?
I think it's a difficult one to really draw a line on, purely because it depends on what title you're playing, it depends on what publisher you're working with. But the reason I think out of the two of them, I would say, if I had to pick two of them rather than be in the middle on like the bias that is a hybrid model, I would say open, because for me a closed league lacks the accessibility of new blood and new talent. I think the fact that you can have wild cards, that you can have the excitement within fans and the buzz of a community behind a 1 in 1,000 chance, that makes a league in the eyes of the fans and the community. You take Leicester City from back in the UK. When they won the Premier League, that was 1,000 to 1 odds in the betting community, and completely turned it up on its head. And that wouldn't have been possible if they didn't have that opportunity. And I think closer to home in esports, there are examples where closed leagues are stopping those sorts of opportunities. You look in Europe at the LEC, for example. Don't get me wrong, it's an amazing league, and they obviously know what they're doing. But you've got teams like K-Corp, who are struggling to kind of enter that space, yet performing really well. They've got the Twitter followers, they've got the same caliber sponsors, yet they haven't got the LEC spot. Right. And it's those sorts of ceilings which I think can limit a closed leagues in that concept of a path to pro. That's why I think the hybrid model really does work, because you get that path to pro, but you're then still underpinning it with the financial sustainability and the viability of a long-term kind of investment in the eyes of everybody that's behind the business, whether that be your brands or your sponsors or your executive board.
Great, David. Actually, you mentioned something which I'm gonna kind of like with Leicester City, and also the other EPL, the European Premier League. There is an element of regulatory, relegation in their league system, whereas in many of the leagues here, except for the fully open ones, there is no relegation, right? Especially if you go to the other, with Overwatch, it's like, those are the teams you get, those are the teams you're getting. And that's a model, interesting enough, very familiar with US franchise sports, because that's always the case. What do you mean that team doesn't play anymore because they sucked last year? So there are things like that. How does that, do you think that can work in esports? Or is it better in a certain sense? You seem to be alluding to the fact that it could be because it gives opportunities for up and comings to become somebody.
Yeah, I think the relegation is kind of a league, not structure, but as a part of the league structure is an interesting factor. I think it's difficult to apply it quite as clean cut as they do in traditional sports. But if you take something like the Louvre agreement, which puts in place that underpinning for teams to know that they've got a slot and they can forecast, we then counter that with parts of the agreement that confirm performance basis, and you've got to show up. Basically, you can't sit on your laurels. And I think that keeps that fire going, and it's a form of relegation if there is that process and there is that structure in place whereby you can not be relegated but lose your partner slot for consistent underperformance, and I think that is a healthy motivation to make sure that teams stay driven, that they stay engaged, that they invest in their talent, and that they don't just kind of see we
hang in the middle.
We got a slot. That's great. Now let's go focus on another title.
Right. Yeah, no, I think we're any questions in the meantime before I go into the next point, because we're coming up on the 5-minute warning at some point. No?
Wow,
all right.
Quick.
So yeah, I know, 25 minutes. Yeah, that's a lot to talk about. But so here's the thing. I mean, earlier, Evan, you talked about opportunities and whatnot, and David, you had mentioned about the path to pro, and I think that there are certain leagues out there, even if they're closed, that has a well-managed challenger league, and that does feed the system. And I think it also makes it more worthwhile for teams like T1 and all that to put in the additional expense of creating that challenger league. And for those of you not familiar with that, it's essentially like your AA, your AAA minors. So there is a feeding system that goes up. But at the end of the day, I think one thing that's really interesting, that's unique about esports as a sport, regardless of the games, is that we play at the pleasure and we exist at the pleasure of the publishers. We're all talking about private IP here. Nobody owns football, nobody owns soccer, nobody owns basketball. Somebody owns every single game that's played right now on esports. And that somebody could be very well organized and create a really good ecosystem like Riot, or it could be very hands-off like Valve. And in a sense, they both work in their own ways, right? I mean, TI is the winningest, biggest prize pool in the world now for esports. But then there's also everything in between. Big companies that botch it every time, small companies that come out with great hits and know how to run it. So how does that affect, especially for team, in terms of a business, that that somebody can put you out of business tomorrow by just saying, hey, you're on that list and you're not playing anymore? How does that affect your business decisions?
A lot, in two short words. No, I think something that we're not alluding to, just an additional element to what you're talking to, is game balance, patches. I mean, when was the last time we've seen a patch to the NFL, right? Minus like the tuck rule. Like, we're in a really weird spot where you don't have guaranteed longevity in anything in terms of the game's life cycle, on the current patch, the game's life cycle on the next patch, which is, back to your first point about challenger talent, academy talent. Oh my God, we have so much interest at T1 in creating the best possible growth model for young and upcoming talent. And I think when it comes to stuff that we're running in Korea, like the Esports Academy, hosted by former T1 pros like Untara, Sky, that provides an avenue where, separate from the publisher, we can still make sure we're on top of what's happening in the context of any given game. When it comes to the publisher, to very briefly answer your question, the only thing we can do is keep as active as possible of an ongoing conversation as we can, show our faith and our interest by supporting community initiatives, whether that be to do with the esport itself or just the audience and community as a whole, and really focus on what the publisher's core values are compared to ours. I think we're able to find happy mediums where T1 might have a strategy that the publisher might not necessarily be as okay with. That's something that we don't walk away from. Let's have a conversation about it. Let's talk about how we can create more positive experiences and how we can help your game have the most longevity as possible. Because when that happens, as a team that's involved in the business and the sport, everybody wins.
David, what about the perspective as a TO, as a tournament operator? you guys run essentially the largest direct publisher leagues around the world. How does that, what parameters are you looking at in terms of your relationships with the publishers as well as the volatility of that uncertainty?
Oh, it's a difficult one for me to comment on because I'm kind of one foot in the door with ESL Gaming, with them being a major partner of the EPL, but I can't really comment on their relationship with other publishers other than Valve, because obviously the ESL Pro League is exclusively linked to Valve, and I think it all depends on the fiber of your publisher and what they value. Valve have been very clear from the start that they do not want closed franchise leagues in CS:GO, and that they are championing openness and opportunity and acceptance to their title. They've been very accommodating of the hybrid model because they really understand the value that it brings, whilst also still kind of staying true to their morals and their wishes for how the title plays. So it all depends on your relationship with those publishers and what feeds down. We know very clearly what Valve want, and we've abided by that, and they're really happy with how that's going. But Riot, Activision, everyone holds different things in different priorities in different regards, and you've just got to try and do your best to balance that, both with what they want from their titles and their games, to what you then need to provide as a business and what your fans expect at the end.
Great. Well, thanks, David. So according to my timer, we're up to 25 minutes. Yep, so I'm getting the light. So thanks again to Evan and David for the time on stage and telling us a little bit about your experiences with the various models out there. Thanks, everybody, for being here today, and feel free to look for these guys during the breaks and stuff to ask more questions if you have any.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank
Thanks.
you.